Hi, and welcome to my channel. It's the end of February and it's time for a wrap up. I could not figure out the way to do this because I was all over the place with tracking what I read and when I read it and all that stuff. So I'm just going to go with the way that I originally had it written in my sheet or in my doc where I keep what I'm planning to read. So first was the 5 books from my TBR game. So the very first one was the NPR book, and it was called This Close: Stories by Jessica Francis Kane. I did not finish this book. I don't know that I'm going to finish it. I just have apparently a problem with short story collections right now. I also had on this list Collected Stories from Carson McCullers, which was one of my physical books that it picked for me. I didn't finish that either. I don't know what it is about short story collections. I think I need them to just be available, and I read them one story and then I go do something else or read something else and then I come back and read one story. And I was trying to read these too fast, like one story a day, and I just wasn't able to do it. I don't know why. There's not anything wrong with the stories. It's more me and my mindset about it, I guess. I don't know what it was, but anyway, I didn't do either one of those. The next thing was reading, I technically got Wicked Deeds from my shelf by Heather Graham, but that was not the first book in the series. The first book was right here, Phantom Evil. So I got that one and I read it. That one was different than I expected it to be. It was not a fantasy romance, which is what I thought it was. I thought it was going to be set in New Orleans and be some kind of fantasy romance. I was right about the New Orleans. I thought that because the way it's spelled crew on the front, it's like one of the Mardi Gras crews. Anyway, that doesn't matter, except that I was right about the New Orleans part and wrong about the fantasy romance. I mean, it had fantasy and it had romance, but it was definitely not what I would call a fantasy romance. What it is the beginning of a mystery series, like the setup to follow a crew, through solving crimes, paranormal crimes. So, Phantom Evil, a woman died. They thought it was a ghost. They being like the people who talked around town. Everybody else, they being the police, said that it was suicide. And so this group was brought in and assembled. They had never worked together before. So they were brought in and assembled to solve the case. Was it a ghost? Was it suicide? Or was it murder? So that's what they had to come up with. If you like those kind of mystery procedural things, which I totally do, then this book would be good. I didn't love it. I thought it was okay, but I'm definitely going to continue with the series and give her a chance to get the group together and kind of get it moving. I don't want to just quit on her after the first book, but it was okay. Then I read, the next one I had to do was the next book in a series. And so that was Stones of Light by Zach Argyle. This one was fantastic. Like, it does not suffer from middle book syndrome. It really kept me engaged the whole time. We learned a lot of new things about the world in this one. We still had all of our different characters telling their POV parts, but as far as the pacing went and who told what story at what point, it never felt to me like I was missing anybody or I wanted more from somebody. I felt like it was just perfect as far as the point of view breakups go and how everything came together. Just perfect. And I gave it 5 stars. Fantastic. I also started another series by Charlaine Harris called Real Murders, and this is the Aurora Teagarden series, and I read this way back at the beginning of the month, but I liked it. I like that we met everybody that's in their little Real Murders group. It is about a group of people who like to get together and talk about true crime things that maybe weren't solved and like debate about what happened to them and all that kind of stuff. And when they get there to have their meeting, somebody has been killed in the building by the manner of one of the people that they've studied. And so other people maybe start dying, and Aurora and her little group end up having to be the suspects and also be like try to help solve. This is way more like a cozy mystery, maybe without the animal companion that we sometimes have in cozy mysteries, but the rest of it is totally a cozy mystery. And that was it for the TBR game picks. So I only read 3 of my 5, but they were very good. Then I did a TBR swap with Nicole from Dusty Book Sniffers, and she sent me They Come at Night and My Best Friend's Exorcism. Now, They Come at Night is the second book in a series, and I messaged her and she was like, oh, I meant to send you the first book. So Her Name is Night is the one she wanted to send me. So that's what I started with. Her Name is Night. It was amazing. 5 stars, fantastic. I was drawn into this world almost immediately. Part of it is set in Ghana and part of it is set in Miami, and we are kind of going back and forth into Nina's past and her present, and she is an assassin, and we don't know how she got there or how she's doing any of that. And then we get to see her childhood and what happened to her in Ghana and why she's now in Miami and why she's an assassin and why she's a knight, because that's not what her name was at the beginning. So great. The second book, My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, this was just so much fun. Like, it was like a punk rock version of a horror, I guess. I don't even know how to describe this. So a group of girls have gone out and they are doing things they shouldn't be doing. They're experimenting with drugs they probably shouldn't be experimenting with. And one of them runs off into the woods, taking her clothes off. And they can't find her until the next morning. And so something has happened to her through the night, but nobody really knows what's going on at first. And then there are just so many hints that maybe something else is in her, like she's been possessed. But at the same time, there are also these moments of like, no, I'm fine, everything is fine, what are you talking about? Like, so we're going back and forth just as much as our best friend is going back and forth. And so it's so good. Like, that part of it, that dynamic between, is something wrong, or are we just growing differently? Like, are we just changing the way our friendship is, or that kind of thing? Or is it really something's going on and I need to help her? So it was just so good. And the whole exorcism part, I mean, it's called My Best Friend's Exorcism. The whole exorcism part was absolutely wild. And my journal where I wrote about it, number one, I tried to draw a bed. You saw that in my last journal update, if you saw that, which was hilarious, the bed that I drew. But I mean, you see this quote that I have on here that was said during the exorcism. It was just wild. And I thought it was so good. And I definitely recommend it if you're trying to get into horror. And it's all set in a high school. So I don't know. I liked it a lot. That's it. For my TBR swap with Nicole, we just did 2 books. So we flipped those. The other thing that I was reading for was the Aelda Adventure. I don't know how to say it, but I had to read for Adrian. I had to read a book with trees on the cover, so My Best Friend's Exorcism counted. And I had to read for Emmeline a book with buildings on the cover, and Full Moon qualified for that. So we'll talk about that in just a second. First, though, I did a book tour for Let Your Lips Twitch, which was a humorous short story collection. And I don't know what the difference was in these short stories and the other short stories, but I finished it and it was so funny. Like, I know it says Let Your Lips Twitch, and I thought, okay, maybe they'll be a little bit funny. They're not going to be hilarious. They were hilarious. My favorite story, and you can go watch the whole thing I did about this, but my favorite story was told from the point of view of a series of books in a library, in the self-help section of a library. So good. So good. Anyway, for the Bookstar read-along, we read in February book 0.5, which is The Pale Dreamer. And apparently it's the beginning of the Bone season. And the character in the Bone season, her code name is the Pale Dreamer. And so we learn in the Pale Dreamer how she got her code name and how she joined this group that she's in. I really don't know a lot more about it than that. They do have some really cool, like, ghost kind of encounters, and I'm really looking forward to how that's going to play out through the rest of the series. So I am gonna keep myself from immediately starting book 1 on March 1st, but I kind of want to go ahead and do that. But I'm trying to hold off. And I wrote down for A-Star Reads for Amy's prompt. I can't remember what it was that she picked, what the prompt was, but I used the Stones of Light book by Zach Argyle to fill that prompt. So maybe I should go back and Maybe I should make sure I write down what the prompt is every time instead of just writing the book that I want to read for it. But anyway, I did Amy's read. And now let's talk about the Dresden Files before we finish up with one last thing. For the Dresden Files this month, we read a novel, a graphic novel, and a short story. So first was the novel, and it was Full Moon. And you can tell maybe from the name and the cover, this was about werewolves. And so it was pretty much Harry telling us about werewolves, like how they work in this world and how maybe they can be created in this world and all kinds of stuff about werewolves. I really enjoyed it. I started this book last year, I think, after I finished the first book for the first time. And I just kind of put it to the side and didn't pick it up again. Not because I wasn't really liking it, but just because it was like, okay, I can read it or not read it, like it's okay. But now that we're doing it as part of a read along, it's much easier for me to be able to chat with people about it. And so, of course, I just wanted to keep going. So I finished that one. The next was the graphic novel, and it was called Ghoul Goblin. This is available on Kindle Unlimited. So I just went and grabbed it on there and read it on my iPad. And it was so good. Like so many things we learned about how the world of Dresden works and how magic works in this world. There's a family that has been cursed, and it's like a curse on their bloodline. And so it's passing down from generation to generation. And right now, this family is being hunted by a ghoul and a goblin. And we learn about those two beings and keep following Harry as he is trying to protect this family. I loved it, and I really want those people from this family to show up later in the series. I'm sure they probably don't, because this was written after the main books in the series. I'm not sure the exact timeline, but I know that the graphic novels came later, so we might not see them again, but it would be very cool if we did. And then finally, the story we read, the short story was called B is for Bigfoot, and I loved it. Number one, I like the little snippets that we get at the beginning. This is from Briefcases. The book is called Briefcases, and it has a bunch of short stories in it. And this one, I like how Jim Butcher comes in and explains like where he got the idea or why he wrote this story or whatever. I really like the little explanation at the front, and I'm pretty sure it's him saying it because it doesn't sound like the regular narrator. So I think if you're listening on audio, I think it's Jim Butcher actually talking about it. Anyway, this one, of course, had Bigfoot, but in not the way you would think about it. So Harry's in his office. He gets a phone call. Somebody says, I need you to meet me out in the trees. And he's like, what? So anyway, he goes to this spot in the forest, and there's a Bigfoot there. And he says, my son is in trouble, and he lives in the city, and I can't protect him because I can't go to the city, or not protect him. I can't help him because I can't go to the city. So then Harry is like, okay, I guess I'll do it. So then he goes to the school. The boy is like 10 years old or something. And he meets him and talks to the boy and learns about what's going on. And it's just a cute little short story. It's barely an hour of reading and listening. And so I liked it. It was cute. I like that we got to meet a Bigfoot without it being like, him being attacking Harry. There was no fighting. There was some fighting in this. Let me not say that, but it was minimal. And we also got to meet a new being and learn a little bit more about them and how that works and what it means to be half supernatural and half human and what that means in this world as well. So just little snippets that we get along the way of how the world works. It's fantastic. Okay. And then finally, before we get to like the extras, the next thing that I like to do is go over to Expedition Through Pages, and her channel, she does Tales from Two Trails TBR game. That's how she chooses her TBR. And she actually lets the readers do like a competition against her. So this year we have our own trail, the viewers, and then she has a trail that she's doing, and we're both going like at the same time. So there were 6 prompts that went with that, and almost all of them I could fit in with the other stuff that I had already read. So the only new things that I couldn't fit in was she had a country read, and then she went and picked the country, and she got Mauritania, which I had never even heard of that country. I mean, I feel like it sounds familiar, so I feel like I've heard of it, but I definitely did not know where it was. So I got to go on a little map hunt in Africa. I also wanted to pinpoint exactly where Ghana was, since I had been reading Her Name is Night. So I wanted to know, and they're not too far from each other, Mauritania and Ghana. So anyway, I read The Desert and the Drum, translated from French and set in Mauritania by a Mauritanian author. This is about a girl who is struggling with struggling with the rules of her community. She is a Bedouin and lives on the edge of the Sahara Desert, and she runs away from her community and goes to the city. That's all I'm going to say about it. I think it was fantastic and definitely worth a read. It's less than 200 pages. If you are at all interested in like historical fiction or any kind of African Bedouin society kind of things, I think that you would really like this book. I really enjoyed it. It was so well done. Then she had a nonfiction pick, and I was already reading The Effort Diet with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot. So I just added that right on in, and that counted for both of those. The Effort Diet, I talked about it earlier. It was okay. It had some of the same things that I've heard before, but I think this book is written for people who have starved themselves or like dieted and never gave in to the cravings that they have. Like they're able to still maintain themselves. Maybe they're 20 pounds overweight, maybe they're even 40 pounds overweight, but this is not written for people who have 50, 80, 100 pounds to lose. I just don't think that it's made for them. But some of the ideas in it I really like. There's a mental section and an emotional section and a physical section. And the mental and the emotional sections were very good. There are some things that I took away from that I've been using in my own life, and I thought that it was good, but not great. Then the last one, I picked the book Freaks by Brett Riley. This also counted as a double up because I needed to read the lowest rated book on my shelf for the Gerbitathon. And I was like, okay, let me go over here and pick this book. It's on NetGalley, and I was pre-approved for books 1 and 2 on NetGalley. And so I was like, okay, let me go try it. I was so pleasantly surprised. I gave this 4 stars. Like it doesn't have a horrible rating. It's a 3 point something. So I guess I just don't have books on my list that have a super low rating, but it was not the ratings weren't exceptional. And there are some huge trigger warnings, especially about bullying and high school violence. Like that definitely needs to be said up front, and you need to make sure that you check on that or whatever before you start. I really liked this. It's about a group of friends who are kind of outcasts in their school. They get bullied and they go to hang out at each other's house. They're going to do a LARPing section, which is live action role play. They pretend to be wizards and they're going to cast a spell, and they're using this book that one of them's found in his like old weird uncle's chest. And what he doesn't know is that it's real. And so when they do the spell, bad things happen. And that's all I'm going to say. I read it. I also read the second book, which is called Travelers, which I also love because this book is set in Arkansas. And if you don't know, the team is called the Arkansas Travelers. That's their like AAA baseball league in Arkansas. It doesn't matter at all. And he might not have known that at all when he wrote this, but the guy is originally from Arkansas and 20 miles from where I grew up. So there's so many references in this book to things in Southeast Arkansas. So if you know anything about Southeast Arkansas, you might really like both of these books. But I read Freaks and I read Travelers in February, both of them through NetGalley, both of them on audio. That's another thing. A lot of audio narrators cannot do Southern accents correctly, especially like in certain areas, different accents, Southern accents sound a little bit different. And there are a few pronunciations that are a little bit non-Southeast Arkansas, but for the most part, the narrator did a fantastic job with the accent. And I actually really loved it. I gave both books 4 stars, and I can't wait for the next one that comes out. But it's just these kids, maybe they got some kind of powers when they unleashed whatever they unleashed. So we're following them in these 2 books as they're navigating their friendship and their relationships and what all of that means as they're changing and growing up. And at the same time, they have government people who may want to know what they're doing and if they're dangerous now that they seem to be enhanced in some kind of way. And then we have their parents who are watching them and trying to figure out what's going on. And at the same time, they're having to deal with whatever it is that they unleashed into the world. So I thought that it was so good and so well done. And I can't wait to read more in this series. I think the biggest disappointment of this month is Royal Assassin. It's the buddy read that I did with Andrew. And we were both just like, ambivalent about the whole thing. I talked about this already in the vlog where I finished this book, but the same things happened over and over and over, and it was just so frustrating. And I don't know if it's because it's the second book in a trilogy or what, but I really did not like it. I wish that the events that happened at the very end could be pushed back to about the 30% mark, and then this book could have been about what probably book 3 is going to be about, because it really was monotony. Like, just so not badly written, and I still enjoyed reading about most of the characters, but it's so frustrating when what seems to me to be common sense that somebody should do, nobody does. Even our main character wants to, and everybody around him is like, no, don't do this thing. And I'm like, of course do this thing. Anyway, it was very frustrating. But I finished that, and that was it for everything that I had planned to read. Now, I finished the month early, and I was like, okay, I'm done with all my books. So what I did was I went back to Her Name is Night, and I did get They Come at Night, the second book, and I read it, and it was just as amazing as the first book. I had no issues having second book syndrome or anything like that. I am so ready for book number 3 to come out. I have got her as a follow so that I find out when it's being released, and I'm going to be getting it as soon as it's available. Then, following in that same tradition, I read The Travelers, which I talked about before, which is the second book after Freaks. And then I read Bonds of Chaos, which is the ending of the Threadlight series. So that is Stones of Light that I read. Then I read Bonds of Chaos, which is book 3, and it was even better. Like, I don't know how you get better than a 5-star, but I gave the whole series as a whole 5 stars. I know I gave books 2 and 3 5 stars. I may have even given book 1 5 stars. I don't remember, but I definitely did for books 2 and 3. And it's just amazing. I talked about this also when I did the vlog of this, but it's when expectations are turned on their heads and you get a unique take on a fantasy trope that feels like everybody does, and it's not even if he had kept the trope just exactly the way it is, I would not have been disappointed. But just having that little bit of a tweak to it made it so much more interesting and better in general. So thank you so much for watching me talk about all of these books, and let me know what your favorite book was that you read this month. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.